Got the trim on the back tonight.
Yeah.
Man, it looks good.
Looked good the other day.
Well, now it's all along the bottom, you know?
Yeah.
Did you drive the duck today?
Like that half-inch wide.
What? Did you drive the duck today?
Yeah, a little.
Outside? Was it a little chilly?
Yeah. We didn't have to go very far.
You
Go,
did?
yeah.
Wow.
Not very long. Got it closer.
Good evening. Welcome to the March 4th, 2019 meeting of the Shawnee Planning Commission. We'll start with roll call. Commissioner Montgomery.
Here.
Commissioner Roth is absent. Commissioner Peterson.
Here.
Commissioner Willoughby.
Here.
Commissioner Beanhoff.
Here.
Commissioner Busby is here. Commissioner Wise.
Here.
Commissioner Braley is absent. Commissioner Les Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Mudgett is absent. Commissioner John Smith.
Here.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible.
The consent agenda. Items 1 and 2 are listed under the consent items agenda. Unless there is a request to remove the items from the consent agenda, the items will be approved in one motion. Is there a request to remove the items from the consent agenda? If not, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Commissioner Montgomery,
I move to approve the consent agenda.
is there a second? Commissioner John Smith?
Second, Mr. Montgomery.
Motion is second to approve the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you. New business. We're doing the proposed text amendments. I guess we left the public hearing open. So staff has something else to add to this?
You can forward those with your recommendation. So at the Planning Commission meeting on January 23rd, you all authorized to publish for a public hearing to consider amendments to the zoning regulations. At the February 20th Planning Commission meeting, staff presented an overview of the proposed changes as well as our downtown design guidelines. Then, as you all know, the public hearing was continued to the meeting tonight. The proposed amendments are basically to the zoning, the use standards and subdivision regulations to reflect desired use and development forms in the downtown area. With your input from the February 20th meeting, we have add some additions to those proposed regulations, including in the Townsquare zoning district to allow condominium, multifamily, and townhomes, and those would be permitted on properties directly to Johnson Drive and/or Neiman Road. And then those have to be associated with office, retail, or other principal permitted uses in the district. If they are residential only, they are permitted on lots that are not directly adjacent to Johnson Drive or Neiman Road. Additionally, the proposed amendments include reduced front, rear, and side yard setbacks to maximize development density, encourage pedestrian-friendly development, and unify the overall district. Setbacks may be permitted with Planning Commission approval through site plan review to accommodate pedestrian spaces, architectural or landscape features, outdoor amenities or dining areas, front stoops or stairways for residential or other necessary access improvements. And then finally, an additional caveat has been added to the Townsquare zoning district regulations to basically, in a case where if there was a conflict between the zoning code and the design standards will apply and are subject to planning commission approval. If the planning commission determines the proposed amendments to chapter 17.45 and 17.51 relative to the Townsquare zoning districts are appropriate, staff recommends the planning commission approve the text amendments to the zoning regulations.
Thank you, Lauren. Does the commission have any questions for staff? Hearing no questions, then we would be open for public hearing on the matter. And seeing as no one is coming forward, then at this point in time, we'll close the public hearing and be in commission discussion. I have one question, if you will, Lauren, and that is parking. Parking seems to be a big consideration to me. And if I'm reading the guidelines, which Stephanie printed off for me, the one thing that's interesting is we will allow some on-street parking and shared parking.
Correct.
And that would be at the commission's approval on that.
Correct.
So if someone came in and said they wanted to use half a street to park cars for their apartment complex, we would be able to say no.
Everything would be on a site and contextual basis. So that's something that we would look at, whether, if there are enough parking spaces to accommodate a use, and then how those are accommodated, whether it's shared parking spaces, whether those are public parking spaces or private parking spaces.
Thank you. Sorry, that was actually a question for staff before we had the public hearing and went into commission discussion. So, does anybody else have anything to say in commission discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Les Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lauren, can you, under the minimum yard setback requirements, paragraph D1, where it talks about outdoor dining areas, private amenities, front stoops, stairways, or other necessary access, also says, or to align with adjacent existing buildings. What's what's your vision on that?
So that one is, if it is reasonable and it fits with the site contextually, perhaps maybe a 5-foot setback might work better with a block if there are a number of adjacent buildings that do have a little bit of a setback, but it would not be a significant setback that we would allow parking. That's what we want to get rid of, get away from that forward front of the lot parking.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going, and that, I don't know if it'd be wise to state some sort of a maximum or whatnot, but I can just hear the argument now of we need to align with the folks next door, and that defeats the whole purpose. And it seems like there's going to need to be some tough love perhaps throughout this, a lot of saying no. I just want to be sure that you have the tools to do so. That's all, sir.
Any other questions or comments or comments? So that I don't repeat myself again, when someone care to put this in a motion?
I have a question.
Commissioner John Smith.
I remember, I don't know, a year or two ago, Overland Park, or we went down to Overland Park and looked at a building that was being built. It was nearly finished, but that unit had office. It was mixed use, but it had underground parking. Is underground parking permitted here if you had someone that come in and wanted to design a facility that had underground parking?
Yes.
Is permissible?
Yes, we do allow that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, would someone care to approach the motion? Commissioner Wise.
I'll make a motion to approve text amendments to the zoning regulations per staff's guidelines.
Is there a second? Commissioner Willoughby?
I'll second the motion.
The motion is second to approve the guidelines and forward them on to the city council. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you. Next, in other business, we're going to have a discussion of the zoning matrix amendments regarding microbreweries. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
Oh,
correct.
thank you, Stephanie.
So we want to bring the Planning Commission our recommendations for breweries and distilleries. So we're looking for permission to bring that for a public hearing on the April 1st Planning Commission meeting. And we're in the research stage right now. We're looking at the American Planning Association best practices for those types of regulations. I'm also reviewing some regulations that I'm aware of in other communities, and we're also looking at regulations in nearby communities here to see how the KC metro area regulates those types of uses, because we've found that there's a lot of interest in those types of uses, and it can be a great entertainment type use in some of our neighborhood commercial and commercial zones. And I think it's important that we find some regulations that open up some possibilities for that type of use in some areas.
Thank you. A question for you. It's breweries and distilleries?
Yes, both
Good.
breweries and distilleries, because they're much alike. We definitely want to make sure that we're taking into account parking requirements and the manufacturing aspect, as well as the sort of more restaurant aspect of it. So we'll probably be looking at a size limitation or a bottling limitation on exactly how much they're producing. We're just trying to figure out which would be the best way to go for Shawnee.
Thank you. Any- Commissioner Stephen Wise.
So on the microbreweries, I know that up to what size is the 30% they tend to use food trucks? Do you know?
I'm not certain. That's something we're researching.
Okay. Because I know one open at Lennox, I think they might be even a little bigger than transport, but they have to use the food trucks. It's like 30% is for food. I don't know at what limit they, kind of break even and start serving their own food. So interesting to see what you find.
Yes, Commissioner Dienhoff.
Yes, this definitely would be helpful. I think perhaps, I know I'm not familiar with the state laws and how they might come into play with part of these zoning regulations, but if you could help educate the commission on that as well, it would be very much appreciated.
Absolutely. We can have a little alcohol brewery distillery training session along with it.
I was going to say tour.
Is that,
Well, we won't
is
have
that
any alcohol,
during our
but we'll have
meeting, or is this a post-meeting
Across the
endeavor
street.
here?
a training with no beverages.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
Well, Dean.
Any other questions? If not, would someone care to make a motion to put this on this would be a public hearing meeting as well? Yeah, okay. Commissioner Wise? Commissioner Peterson.
I move that we place on the April 1st of 2019 a public hearing for the zoning matrix amendments regarding microbreweries and distilleries. Please and thank you.
Is there a second? Commissioner Wise.
I'll second the motion.
So the motion is a second to have a public hearing on April 1st for distilleries and breweries and zoning amendments for that. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you. Does the staff have anything else for the commission?
Nice touch.
Does the commission have anything for staff?
Just-
Commissioner Stephen?
I don't know that person, but
Les Smith.
Stephen's my brother. Unfortunately, he died. Just a quick good work to you, Lauren, on the previous item. Well done. That's all. Sweet.
Oh, I can wait you out tonight. And it's longer than 10 minutes, otherwise I'll. Oh, Commissioner Les Smith.
Mr. Chairman, I move to yield the floor to Commissioner Willoughby for a motion.
I move for adjournment.
I second.
There is a protracted motion for adjournment. Did everyone understand this gambit?
No, I'm usually ignored anyway, so it's okay.
My, we are sensitive tonight, aren't we? Somewhere in there, I think there was a motion for adjournment and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. We're done. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
You know, there's, as we talked about, there's, I don't call it